Ethan Parker leaned back in his desk chair, the glow of his computer screen casting a faint light across the room. Another long day of coding had blurred into evening, and his head throbbed from staring at lines of code that refused to cooperate. He checked his phone, 7:45 p.m. He sighed. It had been another late night, another missed dinner with Megan and the kids. Just one more bug to fix, he muttered to himself, though he knew Megan would already be putting Ava and Liam to bed. At home, Megan Parker's day had been equally exhausting but for entirely different reasons. As a freelance interior designer, her time was split between meeting clients, managing deliveries, and juggling the chaos of two young children. That week, she had ordered an assortment of supplies for a major project, a set of antique-inspired decor pieces for a wealthy client's downtown apartment. It was her largest commission yet, and the pressure to deliver perfection was weighing heavily on her. The doorbell rang, breaking her concentration as she reviewed fabric samples. "Mama, someone's at the door," Ava called from the living room. Megan set the samples aside, smoothed her hair, and opened the door to find Kyle, their postman, standing on the porch with a smile. "Good evening, Mrs. Parker," Kyle said, tipping his hat slightly. "I've got a package for you. Heavy one this time." Megan smiled politely. "Thank you, Kyle. Just leave it by the door, and I'll grab it later." "Are you sure? Looks like it could use a second pair of hands," Kyle offered. Megan hesitated. The box did look heavier than usual, and Ethan wasn't home to help. "Okay, thank you. I appreciate it." Kyle followed her inside, carefully setting the box on the kitchen counter. "Wow, what's in here? Bricks." Megan laughed lightly. "Clothes, ceramic tiles for a project I'm working on." "That explains it," Kyle said, looking around the neatly organized space. "You've got a good eye for design. Your house feels put together, you know?" Megan felt a small flutter of pride at the compliment. "Thanks. It's what I do for a living." They chatted briefly about her work, and Megan found herself surprised by how easy the conversation was. Kyle had a laid-back charm, the kind that made him instantly likable. "Well, I'd better let you get back to it," Kyle said, glancing at his watch. "I'll see you around, Mrs. Parker." "Thanks again, Kyle," Megan said, walking him to the door. As she returned to her work, she thought little of the interaction. It was just a neighborly exchange, nothing more. The following week, Megan was in the middle of a chaotic morning when Kyle showed up again, this time with a smaller package. "Twice in 1 week," Megan joked as she opened the door. "What can I say? I aim to please," Kyle replied with a grin. The delivery gave Megan a brief reprieve from the stress of her day. Kyle seemed genuinely interested in her work, asking questions about the project she was working on and even offering a few lighthearted suggestions. "Ever think about adding some vintage postcards to your displays?" he asked. "I've got a collection you might find interesting." "Really? I love vintage pieces," Megan said, her curiosity piqued. "I'll bring a few by next time," Kyle offered. By the time Kyle arrived again the following week, Megan had begun looking forward to his visits. They had developed a rapport. Harmless, friendly, she told herself. True to his word, Kyle brought a small collection of vintage postcards, neatly stored in a leather-bound case. "These are beautiful," Megan said as she flipped through them. "Glad you like them," Kyle replied. "You've got a good eye for detail. It's rare to meet someone who appreciates this kind of thing." Megan smiled, a faint blush creeping to her cheeks. "Well, thanks for sharing them." Their conversation lingered longer than usual, and when Kyle finally left, Megan felt a pang of guilt. She shook it off, telling herself there was nothing wrong with enjoying a friendly chat. A few days later, Kyle returned with another delivery, a larger package Megan hadn't expected. He offered to help carry it inside, and once again, Megan agreed. This time, as he set the package down, their conversation took a slightly more personal turn. "You're always so busy," Kyle remarked. "Do you ever take a break?" Megan laughed nervously. "Not often. My husband works long hours, so I'm usually the one running the show." "That must be tough," Kyle said sympathetically. "You deserve someone who makes time for you." Megan's heart skipped a beat at the comment. She quickly changed the subject, but the tension between them was palpable. As Kyle prepared to leave, he hesitated by the door. "If you ever need help with anything, you know where to find me." Megan smiled weakly. Thanks, Kyle. I'll keep that in mind. After he left, Megan sat at the kitchen table, her thoughts racing. She told herself it was just a harmless conversation, but deep down, she felt a growing unease. Whispers from the neighbor. The Parker family's suburban street was a quiet one, where every driveway had a neatly trimmed lawn, and the neighborhood watch group prided itself on knowing everyone's business. At the heart of the gossip network was Linda Wallace, a retired schoolteacher whose favorite pastime was observing her neighbors and piecing together their stories. Her perch by the front window gave her an unobstructed view of the street, and she rarely missed a detail. So when Kyle, the postman, began lingering at the Parker house, Linda noticed. Linda sipped her morning coffee as she watched Kyle's truck pull into the Parker's driveway for the third time that week. Instead of simply leaving the package on the porch, Kyle rang the bell. Linda squinted, her curiosity piqued. Interesting, she muttered to herself. The door opened, and Megan appeared. Linda watched as Kyle handed her a package, said something that made Megan laugh, and then followed her inside. Linda leaned forward, her coffee forgotten. She tapped her chin thoughtfully, watching the postman emerge nearly an hour later with a grin on his face. Well, isn't that curious? A conversation with Ethan. Later that afternoon, Linda spotted Ethan returning home from work. She seized the opportunity, making her way across the lawn with her best casserole dish in hand. Ethan, she called out as he grabbed his briefcase from the car. Hi, Linda, Ethan said, smiling politely. I made too much lasagna last night, she said, handing him the dish. Thought you and Megan might like some. That's kind of you, Ethan said, taking the dish. Linda hesitated, her expression turning conspiratorial. I hope you don't mind me saying, but your wife seems to be very friendly with that postman. He's been around quite a lot lately. Ethan frowned, caught off guard. Kyle? He's just been delivering some stuff for Megan's projects. Linda smiled knowingly. I'm sure that's all it is. But you know me. I can't help but notice things. As Linda walked away, Ethan felt a prickle of unease, a seed of doubt. Ethan tried to brush off Linda's comment, but her words stuck with him. That evening, as he sat at the dinner table with Megan and the kids, he observed her closely. So, Linda said Kyle's been coming around a lot lately, Ethan said casually, taking a sip of water. Megan stiffened ever so slightly, her fork hovering mid-air. Well, I've been ordering a lot for the project. He's just helping me carry stuff inside. Ethan nodded, but he couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story. Later that night, while Megan was in the shower, Ethan scrolled through her phone. He found nothing unusual, just messages to friends and work-related notes. Still, the unease lingered. Over the next week, Ethan began paying closer attention. He noticed how Megan seemed more distracted, her phone always within reach. She had started dressing up more, even when she didn't leave the house, and her explanations for small details often felt overly rehearsed. One evening, as Megan folded laundry, Ethan asked, Do you ever get tired of ordering so many things for your projects? Megan laughed nervously. It's part of the job, I guess. Why do you ask? No reason, Ethan replied, masking his growing suspicion, but the unease gnawed at him, and he decided he needed more than vague feelings to confirm or dismiss his doubts. Linda's observations continue. Linda, meanwhile, continued to watch the Parker house with avid interest. She saw Kyle's visits become more frequent, and each time, her suspicions grew. One afternoon, she caught Megan and Kyle standing too close on the front porch. From her angle, it looked like Kyle touched Megan's arm, a brief but intimate gesture. Linda picked up her phone and dialed Ethan's number. Ethan, it's Linda, she said. I don't want to overstep, but I thought you should know. Kyle's been spending a lot of time at your house when you're not home. There was a long pause before Ethan replied, his voice measured. Thanks, Linda. I'll look into it. A husband's suspicion. Ethan Parker wasn't a man prone to paranoia. He considered himself rational, grounded, the kind of person who trusted evidence over instinct. But as the days wore on, the nagging feeling that something wasn't right with Megan consumed him. The subtle shifts in her behavior were impossible to ignore. She laughed less around him, seemed more guarded with her phone, and had an edge of nervous energy that didn't match her usual demeanor. Linda's observations had planted a seed, but now Ethan's own eyes were watering it. That evening, as he lay awake in the dim glow of their bedroom, Ethan made a decision. He would uncover the truth, no matter what. Ethan began his investigation cautiously. He didn't want to raise Megan's suspicions or create unnecessary conflict if his concerns were unfounded. His first move was to check their shared credit card statements. Scrolling through the transactions on his laptop, Ethan noticed nothing unusual at first. Grocery store purchases, online orders for Megan's projects, and utilities. Then, a charge caught his attention. A coffee shop downtown. The timestamp was from 2:30 p.m. on a Tuesday, a time when Megan was usually home or working in her studio. Odd, Ethan muttered to himself. He cross-referenced the date with his work calendar and realized it was one of the days he'd stayed late at the office. Planting a camera. Convinced he needed more definitive evidence, Ethan decided to install a discrete camera in the living room. He rationalized it as a security measure, something Megan wouldn't question. Package theft's been going up lately, he told her over dinner. I'm thinking about setting up a camera by the front door. Megan hesitated, her fork pausing midair. Is that really necessary? We've never had an issue before. Better safe than sorry, Ethan replied casually. She nodded, though Ethan noticed the faintest flicker of unease cross her face. Ethan didn't confront Megan immediately. Instead, he spent the next few days gathering as much evidence as possible. He checked the camera footage daily, piecing together a timeline of Kyle's visits. He took screenshots of their text conversations and even checked Megan's planner for corroborating details. By the end of the week, Ethan had enough evidence to confirm his suspicions. But what now? Ethan found himself pacing the living room late one night, his mind racing with questions. Should he confront Megan directly? Should he wait and catch her in the act? What would happen to their family if the truth came out? The turning point. Ethan's suspicions were finally confirmed beyond a doubt when he reviewed the latest footage from the living room camera. It showed Megan and Kyle sitting close on the couch, their conversation animated. Then, Megan leaned in, and they kissed. Ethan's heart sank as he watched the scene unfold, every second driving a knife deeper into his chest. He stopped the footage and sat back in his chair, staring blankly at the screen. For a long time, he didn't move. He felt a storm of emotions, rage, betrayal, heartbreak, all crashing over him at once. Finally, he whispered to himself, "It's time to end this." Proof in the shadows. Ethan Parker sat in the glow of his laptop screen, his chest tight as he watched the incriminating footage of Megan and Kyle. His mind was a storm of emotions, rage, disbelief, heartbreak. The woman he had loved and trusted for over a decade had betrayed him in their own home. He replayed the video again, though it only deepened the wound. The evidence was irrefutable. Megan had crossed a line she could never uncross. Ethan leaned back, rubbing his temples as he thought about what to do next. Confronting her immediately felt too easy. He needed her to feel the weight of her actions, just as he had felt the crushing blow of betrayal. "This isn't over," he muttered to himself, setting the trap. Ethan spent the next few days meticulously planning his next move. He wanted Megan to know that he knew, but not until the moment was right. He also wanted Kyle, the man who had so brazenly inserted himself into Ethan's life, to face consequences of his own. He began by creating a timeline, documenting every suspicious interaction between Megan and Kyle. He compiled the footage, screenshots of text messages, and notes from his observations. The evidence painted a damning picture of their affair. Next, Ethan staged a confrontation. He waited until a day when he knew Kyle would visit, pretending to leave for work but parking his car a block away. The confrontation. Ethan's hands gripped the steering wheel tightly as he watched Kyle's mail truck pull into the driveway. Megan opened the door with a smile, greeting him warmly. Ethan's stomach churned as he watched her let Kyle inside. After giving them enough time to get comfortable, Ethan drove back and parked in front of the house. He walked up the driveway, his heart pounding with adrenaline. He didn't knock or ring the bell. He simply opened the door and stepped inside. The sound of his footsteps echoed through the house, cutting through the hushed voices in the living room. When he turned the corner, he saw them, Megan and Kyle sitting close on the couch, startled by his sudden presence. "Don't stop on my account," Ethan said, his voice icy. Megan shot to her feet, her face pale. Ethan, what are you doing home? Kyle stood as well, stammering, I should go. You're not going anywhere, Ethan snapped, his gaze locked on Kyle. Sit down. Kyle hesitated but complied, sinking back onto the couch. Ethan turned to Megan, his expression unreadable. How long has this been going on? Megan's lips trembled as she tried to find the words. It's not what it looks like. Don't lie to me, Ethan barked, his voice sharp enough to make her flinch. Tears welled in Megan's eyes. A few weeks, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan let out a bitter laugh. A few weeks. In our home. With the postman. Kyle opened his mouth to speak, but Ethan cut him off. And you? Do you make it a habit of seducing married women on your route, or am I just the lucky one? Kyle stammered. I didn't mean for it to. Ethan stepped closer, towering over him. Get out of my house before I call the cops. Kyle didn't need to be told twice. He bolted for the door, leaving Megan and Ethan alone in the suffocating silence. The fallout. Megan collapsed onto the couch, burying her face in her hands. Ethan, I'm so sorry. I never meant for this to happen. Ethan stood over her, his anger simmering just beneath the surface. You didn't mean for this to happen? You invited him into our home, Megan. You betrayed me, our family. For what? A fling? Megan sobbed. I felt lonely. You're always working, and Kyle, he paid attention to me. I know it's not an excuse, but it's the truth. Ethan stared at her, his jaw tight. Lonely? So instead of talking to me, you decided to destroy everything we've built? She looked up at him, her eyes pleading. I made a mistake. No, Ethan interrupted, his voice cold. A mistake is spilling coffee on your shirt. This was a choice. Over and over again. Megan's tears fell harder, but Ethan felt no sympathy. He turned and walked away, leaving her to sob alone in the living room, planning revenge. The confrontation wasn't enough to satisfy Ethan's sense of justice. Megan's betrayal was personal, but Kyle's role in it infuriated him just as much. He wanted them both to feel the weight of their actions, and he knew exactly how to make that happen. Ethan began by gathering everything he had documented, the footage, texts, and notes, and created a folder labeled, for later. He didn't plan to expose Megan immediately, but he wanted the option if she tried to deny or downplay her actions. As for Kyle, Ethan used his connections to dig into his background. He discovered that Kyle's position with the Postal Service required a spotless record, which gave Ethan an idea. Ethan filed a formal complaint, accusing Kyle of misconduct on the job. While he didn't detail the affair, he provided enough information to raise questions about Kyle's professionalism. Within weeks, Kyle was under investigation, his once secure job suddenly on shaky ground. Ethan's revenge. Ethan Parker sat in the quiet of his guest room, the wheels of his mind spinning with cold precision. The pain of Megan's betrayal still burned within him, but it had crystallized into something sharper, a desire for revenge. This wasn't about simple payback. It was about making Megan and Kyle understand the depth of what they had destroyed. Revenge, Ethan decided, would be a slow, deliberate process. Ethan's first move was to ensure Megan could never rewrite the narrative. He compiled every piece of evidence he had gathered, the incriminating footage, screenshots of text messages, and timestamps of Kyle's visits. He stored it all on a USB drive labeled The Truth and created a backup in the cloud. He started small, sharing the evidence with a few close friends and family members. His intention wasn't to humiliate Megan outright, but to ensure those closest to them understood the real reason for their marital breakdown. When Megan's sister, Rachel, called him, her voice was a mix of anger and disbelief. Is this real, Ethan? Rachel asked. It's real, Ethan replied, his tone flat. Rachel sighed. I don't know what to say. I'm so sorry. Don't apologize for her, Ethan said. But now you know the truth. Kyle, the man who had arrogantly invaded Ethan's home and family, was next on the list. Ethan wasn't content with merely filing a complaint against him. He wanted Kyle to feel the consequences of his actions in every aspect of his life. Using his technical skills, Ethan created an anonymous email account and began sending carefully worded messages to Kyle's employer, detailing his inappropriate behavior. He attached screenshots of the texts between Kyle and Megan, framing them as evidence of misconduct during work hours. Within weeks, Kyle was placed under investigation. The whispers among his co-workers were loud enough to reach Ethan, who smirked every time he heard about Kyle's mounting troubles. But Ethan wasn't done. He posted anonymously on local forums, detailing Kyle's affair without naming Megan. The posts went viral in the community, turning Kyle into a pariah. Neighbors who once greeted him warmly now avoided him, their polite smiles replaced with disapproving stares. Ethan's next step was more personal. He knew Megan valued her image as a devoted wife and mother, and he was determined to dismantle it. He invited close friends and family to a dinner party, framing it as a chance to reconnect amidst the tension in their marriage. Megan, desperate to repair her reputation, eagerly agreed. The evening began innocently enough. Guests mingled, sipping wine and exchanging pleasantries. Megan played the gracious hostess, her smile bright but nervous under Ethan's watchful gaze. When dinner was served, Ethan stood to make a toast. "I want to thank you all for being here tonight," he began, raising his glass. "It means a lot to Megan and me, especially after everything we've been through." Megan's smile faltered as she glanced at him, sensing something was wrong. Ethan continued, his tone turning cold. "I think it's important to be honest with the people who matter most in your life. And tonight, I'd like to share some honesty of my own." He pulled a small remote from his pocket and pressed a button. The television in the living room flickered to life, displaying footage from his security camera. Gasps filled the room as Megan and Kyle's betrayal played out on the screen. Megan's face went pale, and she shot to her feet. "Ethan, stop." Ethan turned to her, his expression hard. "Why? This is what you chose, Megan. This is who you are." The room descended into chaos as guests murmured and exchanged shocked looks. Megan fled the room in tears, leaving Ethan to finish his toast. "To truth," he said bitterly, raising his glass before downing the contents in one gulp. The final blow. Megan's reputation was in ruins, but Ethan wanted to make sure she truly felt the weight of her actions. He filed for divorce the following week, citing infidelity as the reason. In court, Ethan presented his evidence with cold efficiency, ensuring he would gain primary custody of Ava and Liam. Megan's lawyer tried to argue for leniency, but the damning evidence made her position untenable. The judge's decision was swift. Ethan would retain custody of the children, while Megan was granted limited visitation rights.